Lila was a young mechanic who loved fixing things. She had a small workshop at the edge of her town. Every day she worked on cars, tractors, and old machines. She loved the smell of oil and the sound of engines coming back to life. Lila always dreamed of finding something unique, something no one else had. One morning, while drinking her coffee, Lila was scrolling through an online auction site. She noticed an ad that caught her attention. It was a barn for sale. The pictures looked strange. The barn's roof was sagging, the walls were crooked, and the wood looked weak. Some of the boards were already falling apart. Most people would ignore it. But Lila saw something else. The price was only $500, she smiled. A cheap old barn might hide an interesting surprise. After thinking for a while, she decided to buy it. The idea of restoring the barn and seeing what she could find excited her. She called the auction office, arranged the payment, and got the keys. The next morning, she drove her small truck to the property. The barn looked worse in person than in the pictures. The grass around it was tall, and the old fence had broken in several places. Lila parked her truck and walked to the entrance. The door creaked loudly as she pushed it open. Dust and old leaves swirled in the sunlight. She took a deep breath. This was going to be an adventure. Inside, the barn smelled old and damp. Broken boards littered the floor. The roof had holes, and sunlight came through in bright lines. Lila walked carefully, testing each step. She imagined fixing the barn, painting the walls, and turning it into a place where she could work on bigger projects. As she explored, she noticed a corner covered with a torn, dusty tarp. Something shiny peeked through. Curious, she lifted the tarp carefully. Lila's eyes widened. Underneath, there was a part of a plane. It was rusty and covered in dirt, but she could see its shape. The nose and the cockpit were visible. Lila could not believe what she was seeing. She stepped closer and ran her hand over the cold metal. The plane was small, like a fighter aircraft from history books she had seen in school. She knew it could not be a new plane. The metal felt old, and the design looked like something from World War II. Lila's heart beat fast. She had never imagined finding something so rare in a simple barn. She carefully examined the wings. One was folded, the other partially broken. Rust had eaten parts of the plane, and dust covered every surface. She looked inside the cockpit. The instruments were old. The leather seat cracked, and the controls were frozen in place. Yet, despite the damage, the plane seemed strong. Lila could imagine it flying again with care and restoration. Excited, Lila took pictures with her phone. She wanted to show her friend Tom, a retired pilot who knew about old planes. She also searched online, comparing the plane with old photographs. She realized that it was indeed a very rare fighter plane, the kind of plane museums tried to keep safe, but here it was, hidden in an abandoned barn. Lila sat down on a broken crate, thinking. She had spent $500 on a collapsing barn, and now she had found something extraordinary. She felt a mix of excitement and responsibility. She knew the plane needed a lot of work, but the idea of restoring it thrilled her. She imagined herself fixing the plane, learning every part, and seeing it fly. Lila's mind raced with ideas. She would need help parts and tools. She would need to study old manuals and learn everything about engines and mechanics. But she was ready. Lila had always loved challenges, and this was the biggest one she had ever faced. For the first time, she felt that her life could change in a big way. She was not just a mechanic anymore. She was about to become a restorer of history, and it all started with a $500 barn and a hidden plane waiting for her discovery. Lila stood up and looked around the barn once more. Dust floated in the sunlight, but to her it felt like magic. She whispered to herself, "This is going to be an adventure I will never forget." With that thought, she made a plan. First, she would clean the barn. Then she would call Tom. After that, the real work would begin. Lila smiled, knowing that her ordinary day had turned into the beginning of an extraordinary journey. The next morning, Lila woke early. She could not stop thinking about the plane she had found in the barn. Her excitement was mixed with curiosity. She wanted to know everything about it. After a quick breakfast, she packed her tools and returned to the barn. The sun shone brightly, casting warm light on the old wooden walls. Lila felt ready to start her first real inspection of the plane. She carefully brushed away the dust and cobwebs. Every time she lifted a cloth or removed a board, she discovered more details. The wings were long and narrow, folded tightly against the body. The cockpit had old dials and switches, and even the leather seat, though cracked, looked almost like it could be saved. Lila ran her fingers over the controls. They were stiff and covered in rust, but she imagined them moving freely again one day. Lila took out her phone and began searching for information. She typed in words like WWII fighter plane and old aircraft restoration. Pictures of similar planes appeared. She compared each detail: the shape of the wings, the cockpit, the nose, and even the markings on the metal. Her heart raced as she realized her plane looked almost identical to one used in the 1940s. She sat down on an old crate, thinking about what she had found. Lila had worked on many machines before, but this was different. This plane had history. It had once flown in the sky, and now it was waiting for her to bring it back to life. Lila felt a strong connection. She knew she had to save it. Her first thought was to call her friend Tom. He was a retired pilot who loved old airplanes. Tom had taught Lila many things about engines and flying when she was younger. She picked up her phone and dialed his number. "Hello, Tom. You won't believe what I found," Lila said, her voice full of excitement. Tom laughed. "What is it this time? A broken tractor or a strange engine?" "It's bigger than that," Lila said. "It's a plane. A World War II fighter plane, and it's in a barn I bought." There was silence on the other side for a moment. Then Tom said, "A plane? Are you serious?" "Yes, I am serious. Come see it tomorrow, please," Lila replied eagerly. The next day, Tom arrived early. He wore his usual blue overalls and a hat with a small airplane logo. When he entered the barn, he froze. His eyes grew wide as he walked slowly toward the plane. "This is amazing," he said softly. "I have seen a few of these in museums, but never like this, hidden in a barn. The condition is better than I expected. The body is strong. It can be restored," Lila smiled. "I knew it was special, but I don't know where to start." Tom examined the plane carefully. He opened the cockpit and checked the instruments. He looked under the wings and even peeked inside the engine area. "It will take time and effort, but it can be done. You will need manuals, parts, and tools. And patience," he said. Lila nodded. She was ready. She had always loved learning, and this plane was going to teach her more than any book could. They spent the day discussing plans. Tom explained how engines worked, how to clean rust, and how to restore old metal. He told her stories of pilots from history who had flown planes like hers. Lila listened carefully. Every word inspired her more. By the evening, Lila had made a list of things she would need: cleaning supplies, replacement parts, manuals, and special tools. She also marked the barn as a safe place to work. She looked at the plane one more time. Even covered in dust and rust, it looked proud and strong. Lila realized that this plane was not just metal and wood. It was a story from the past, waiting for her to bring it back. She felt proud and excited. She knew her life was about to change in ways she could not imagine. As the sun set, Lila left the barn with a smile. Her heart was full of hope. She had found something rare, something that could teach her, challenge her, and inspire her. Tomorrow, the real adventure would begin. Lila could hardly sleep that night. Her mind kept returning to the plane in the barn. She kept thinking about its history, the pilots who might have flown it, and the adventures it had once known. By morning, she felt a strong determination. She was going to start restoring it, but she knew she could not do it alone. After breakfast, Lila packed her small toolbox and drove back to the barn. The sun was shining and a soft breeze blew through the broken boards. She stepped carefully across the floor, her eyes scanning the plane for any new discoveries. Every angle revealed more details: an old bolt, a faded marking, a small piece of leather that had survived decades of dust and rain. She pulled out her phone and called Tom. "Good morning." "Lila," he said in his calm, cheerful voice, "have you thought more about the plane?" "Yes, I have," Lila replied. "I want to restore it, but I will need your help. I cannot do this alone." "I was hoping you would say that," Tom said. "I can come tomorrow. We will start by examining the plane carefully, making a plan and deciding what parts we need. Are you ready?" "I am ready," Lila said, her voice full of excitement. The next day, Tom arrived with a small van full of tools and equipment. He stepped into the barn, looking around at the dusty walls and the sagging roof. When he saw the plane, he stopped. He smiled and shook his head. "You are not exaggerating," he said. "This is a real fighter plane. You have a rare find here, Lila." Lila smiled, feeling proud. She had never imagined that buying a cheap old barn would lead to something so extraordinary. Tom spent the morning inspecting every part of the plane. He checked the engine, the wings, the cockpit, and even the undercarriage. He explained each part to Lila in detail. "This is the engine," he said, pointing to a rusty piece of metal. "It may look old and worn, but with cleaning and some repairs it can run again. The wings need attention, but they are strong. And the cockpit instruments, though frozen now, can be restored carefully." Lila listened intently. Every word filled her with knowledge and hope. She took notes, asking questions whenever she did not understand. Tom showed her how to carefully remove rust, how to protect delicate parts, and how to organize the small screws and tools. Lila realized that restoring this plane would not just be about mechanics. It would be about patience, attention, and learning. After lunch, they started cleaning small parts of the plane. Lila carefully wiped the cockpit, brushing away dust and old leaves. She found a small metal plate with numbers on it and took a picture. Tom said it was important for identifying the plane and finding the right parts. Lila felt like a detective, uncovering clues from the past. By the end of the day, Lila's arms were tired, but her heart was full of excitement. The plane already looked a little brighter. Some of the rust had been removed, and small pieces of the cockpit were shining in the sunlight. Lila realized that every hour she spent working on the plane made it feel more alive. Tom clapped her on the shoulder. "You are doing well, Lila. This plane will fly again if you keep going. And more than that, you are learning skills that most people never even think about. You are making history live again." Lila smiled. She felt proud and determined. She knew that restoring the plane would take weeks, maybe months, but she was ready. This was not just a project, it was her dream. She had found a purpose that excited her every morning. As the sun began to set, Lila cleaned her tools and covered the plane with a tarp. She looked at it one last time before leaving the barn. She whispered softly, "Tomorrow we start something amazing." Walking back to her truck, Lila felt a strong sense of hope. The barn that she had bought for only $500 had already given her something priceless. A rare plane, a big challenge, and the chance to prove herself. She knew her life was about to change in ways she had never imagined, and she could hardly wait to continue her adventure. The next morning, Lila woke early, filled with excitement. She could hardly wait to return to the barn and begin restoring the plane. She packed her toolbox, some cleaning supplies, and a notebook to record everything she learned. Today was the first day of real work, and she wanted to do it carefully. When Lila arrived at the barn, the sunlight poured through the broken roof, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air. She looked at the plane, now partially cleaned from the work she and Tom had done yesterday. It seemed to wait for her, like a silent partner in a grand project. Lila smiled and approached it with determination. Her first task was cleaning the cockpit. She removed the old cloth and cobwebs, brushing away layers of dust. The dials were covered in grime, and the leather seat had small cracks, but Lila could see the shape and beauty of each part. She carefully noted which parts needed repair and which could be preserved. Cleaning the small buttons and switches required patience, and Lila found herself focused entirely on this small, delicate work. After the cockpit, she moved to the wings. Rust had eaten some parts of the metal, but the main structure seemed solid. Lila began sanding the rusted areas and applying a protective coating to stop further decay. She realized that every small action she took was important. Even a single bolt could affect the plane's future performance. She felt a sense of pride with each improvement. Lila also took measurements and wrote them down. She compared her notes with pictures and manuals she had found online. Every detail mattered. The length of the wings, the position of the bolts, the shape of the cockpit glass. She was learning more than she had ever imagined about planes. It was not just mechanics anymore. It was history, science, and art combined. By late morning, Tom arrived to check her progress. He walked slowly around the plane, examining every cleaned surface. "You are doing a great job, Lila," he said with a smile. "The cockpit looks much better and the wings are holding up well. Keep going and the plane will start to look like it once did in the sky." Lila felt proud but knew there was much more work ahead. Together they began removing old parts that were too damaged to repair. Tom explained each piece and showed her how to store them safely for later reference. Lila watched carefully, absorbing every detail. She realized that restoring a plane was more than just putting parts together. It was about respecting history and understanding how everything worked together. As the day went on, Lila cleaned more surfaces, polished small metal parts, and started assembling pieces that could be saved. She worked methodically, making sure every screw, bolt, and wire was in the right place. She felt a deep connection with the plane, imagining it soaring above the clouds as it once had decades ago. Her hands were sore by the afternoon, but her spirit was high. Every small achievement made the plane look more complete and more alive. Lila could almost imagine the engine starting and the propeller spinning, as if it were calling her to finish the work.
She knew she was not just restoring metal.
She was restoring a story, a piece of history that had been forgotten for years. Before leaving the barn, Lila cleaned her tools and covered the plane with a tarp to protect it from dust and sunlight. She stepped back and admired her progress. The plane looked stronger, cleaner, and more impressive than the day she had discovered it. Lila felt a sense of accomplishment she had never felt before. Walking back to her truck, she thought about the long journey ahead. There would be challenges, setbacks, and days when she would feel tired. But she also knew that every moment spent on this project would teach her something new. Lila smiled, feeling proud of her determination. She had bought a collapsing barn for $500, and now it had given her the opportunity to restore history, learn new skills, and follow her passion. As she drove home, Lila whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning. One day this plane will fly again and I will have brought it back to life." Her heart was filled with hope and excitement. She could not wait for tomorrow to continue the work. Lila arrived at the barn early the next morning. The sun was soft, casting warm light through the broken roof. She looked at the plane, proud of the progress she had made. The cockpit was cleaner and the wings had started to shine. But today Lila knew she would face a new challenge. She opened the engine compartment carefully. The engine had been covered in dust and rust for decades. Lila had cleaned some parts before, but now she needed to see if it would actually work. She checked each bolt, wire, and pipe, making sure everything was in its place. Her hands shook slightly with excitement and worry. After hours of preparation, she tried to start the engine. She turned the key slowly. The engine sputtered once, then made a coughing sound and finally went silent. Lila's heart sank. She had been so careful, but the engine refused to start. She felt frustrated and tired. She sat down on an old crate, taking a deep breath. Lila knew that setbacks were part of any big project, but this one felt bigger than she expected. She looked at the plane, imagining it soaring in the sky. She did not want to give up. She reminded herself that patience and persistence were the keys to success. Lila decided to call Tom. She explained what had happened with the engine. Tom listened carefully. "Lila, this is normal," he said kindly. "Engines that have been unused for decades often need more than cleaning. We will need to check each part carefully and replace what is broken. You can do this." Encouraged by Tom's words, Lila went back to work. She spent hours disassembling the engine piece by piece. Each small part was cleaned, polished, and checked. She even labeled them in boxes so she would not lose track. Some parts were too damaged and needed replacements, which meant more research and more waiting. But Lila felt a new kind of excitement. Every problem was a puzzle, and she loved puzzles. Days turned into weeks. Lila faced more challenges than she expected. Some screws were stuck, some wires were brittle, and some metal pieces had hidden rust. She sometimes felt tired and wondered if she could finish the restoration. But every time she looked at the plane, she remembered why she started. She wanted to bring this piece of history back to life. To stay motivated, Lila took small victories seriously. One day she polished a part of the wing and it shone like new. Another day she fixed a small gear in the engine. Each small success reminded her that progress was possible, even if it was slow. Lila also discovered new skills during this time. She learned how to solder wires, tighten screws without damaging metal, and clean fragile instruments carefully. She read manuals and watched videos, gaining knowledge she had never thought she would need. The plane had become more than a project. It had become a teacher. Even her friends noticed a change in her. Lila was more confident, patient, and focused. She smiled more often, and her determination inspired those around her. The barn that had once seemed empty and broken now felt alive with possibilities. One afternoon, after many hours of work, Lila looked at the plane. She could see that all her hard work was paying off. The cockpit was cleaner, the engine was ready for testing again, and the wings were straight and strong. Lila felt a deep sense of pride. She knew the road ahead was still long, but she had overcome her first major challenge. Before leaving the barn that day, Lila carefully covered the plane with a tarp. She looked at it and whispered, "We will make it fly. I promise." Walking back to her truck, she felt a mix of tiredness and excitement. The journey was not easy, but every challenge made her stronger. Lila knew that persistence, patience, and love for her work would eventually bring the plane back to life. Her $500 barn had given her more than a project. It had given her determination, skills, and a dream she was ready to follow. And now, with every obstacle she overcame, Lila knew she was one step closer to achieving something extraordinary. Lila arrived at the barn with a sense of excitement she had not felt in weeks. Today felt different. She had spent countless hours cleaning, repairing, and studying the plane. Every nut and bolt was in place, and the engine had been carefully rebuilt. Lila's hands were still small and delicate, but they had grown strong from all the work she had done. Today she hoped all her efforts would pay off. She pushed open the creaking barn door, sunlight streaming inside. The plane sat in the center, covered with a protective tarp. Lila gently pulled the tarp away and took a deep breath. The plane looked brighter, cleaner, and stronger than ever before. Every small repair, every hour of work had made a difference. Lila ran her hand along the polished wing and smiled. Tom arrived shortly after, carrying a small toolkit and a notebook. His eyes widened as he looked at the plane. "Lila, it looks amazing. You've done a lot of work," he said. "Today we are going to see if all this effort pays off. Are you ready?" "I am ready," Lila said, her voice steady but full of excitement. She felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. They began the preparations to start the engine. Lila checked every wire, every bolt, and every part once again. She carefully adjusted the throttle and made sure the fuel lines were connected properly. Tom watched closely, giving advice and encouragement. "Remember, slow and steady. Patience is important," he said. Lila nodded and took a deep breath. She turned the key in the ignition. For a moment, nothing happened. Her heart pounded. She adjusted the controls slightly and tried again. The engine sputtered once, then coughed, and then roared to life. Lila's eyes widened and a smile spread across her face. The sound of the engine was music to her ears. It was loud and strong, like the plane was waking up after decades of sleep. Tom laughed with joy. "You did it, Lila. The engine is running." The barn seemed to fill with energy. Dust swirled in the sunlight, and the plane's polished wings glinted in the light. Lila walked around the plane, listening to the steady hum of the engine. She could not believe what she had accomplished. All the hard work, the setbacks, the late nights, and long hours had led to this moment. Tom guided Lila through the next steps. They tested the controls, checking the ailerons, rudder, and flaps. Each part moved smoothly. The cockpit instruments, which had once been frozen and covered in dust, now worked perfectly. Lila felt a sense of pride she had never experienced before. She had brought history back to life. As the engine continued to run, Lila imagined the plane soaring through the sky. She pictured the wind rushing past her face, the clouds above, and the freedom of flying high. The barn, once quiet and dusty, now felt alive with possibility. Lila realized that this plane was not just metal and bolts, it was a story, a dream, and a part of history she had revived. Neighbors began to notice the sound of the engine. Some came closer to see what was happening. They were amazed to see a young mechanic standing proudly next to a World War II fighter plane, fully restored and alive again. Lila smiled, realizing that her discovery was inspiring others as well. By the evening, the engine was turned off, and the plane was carefully covered with a tarp. Lila and Tom cleaned their tools and walked around the barn one last time. Lila felt tired but incredibly happy. Today had been a big break. After months of effort and challenges, the plane had finally come to life. Lila looked at the barn and whispered to herself, "We are ready for the next step. One day you will fly and I will be there with you." She felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The $500 barn that had seemed so ordinary had given her a rare opportunity to restore history and change her life. As Lila drove home that evening, she felt a mixture of excitement and determination. The journey was far from over, but she knew she had crossed an important milestone. The plane had roared to life, and so had her dream. She could not wait to continue, knowing that the best part of the adventure was just beginning. The morning sun shone brightly over the barn. Lila could hardly sleep the night before. Her mind was full of excitement, hope, and a little nervousness. Today was the day she would take the plane for its first flight. After months of cleaning, repairing, and restoring, the moment had finally arrived. Leela arrived at the barn early. She looked at the plane shining in the sunlight. Its polished wings and smooth body reflected all the hard work she had put into it. She took a deep breath, feeling both pride and anticipation. Today, her dream would come alive. Tom arrived shortly after, smiling and carrying his small toolkit. "Are you ready?" he asked. Lila nodded, her hands slightly trembling with excitement. They spent the morning checking every detail one last time. The engine was tested. The controls moved smoothly, and all instruments in the cockpit worked perfectly. Lila listened to the hum of the engine, feeling a connection she had never experienced before. It was as if the plane was calling to her, ready to take her into the sky. With Tom's guidance, Lila climbed into the cockpit. The leather seat felt familiar now, and the controls fit perfectly under her hands. She adjusted the mirrors, checked the instruments, and whispered to the plane, "We are ready." Her heart pounded with excitement and a little fear. She knew this was the moment of truth. Slowly, she guided the plane out of the barn. The wheels rolled over the uneven ground, but Lila was careful. She kept her eyes on the path ahead, making sure every movement was smooth. Tom followed closely, watching her progress and giving encouragement. When they reached the open field, Lila stopped the plane. The wide sky stretched above her, full of clouds and sunlight. She took a deep breath and felt a rush of freedom. All her hard work had led to this moment. She felt proud, determined, and ready. Lila started the engine. The roar of the propeller filled the air. She moved the throttle forward slowly. The plane began to roll, picking up speed. Lila's hands were steady and her eyes focused. The ground beneath her started to move faster, and then with a gentle lift, the plane rose into the sky. Lila's heart soared. She could see the barn below, the fields, and the distant trees. The wind rushed past her, and she felt completely alive. For the first time, she realized the true power of her work. The plane she had restored was flying, and she was guiding it through the sky. She made gentle turns, feeling the controls respond perfectly. Every detail she had studied, every bolt she had cleaned, every hour she had spent working on the plane mattered now. Lila felt a deep sense of achievement. She had not only restored a machine, but had brought history back to life. After a few loops in the sky, Lila guided the plane back toward the field. She landed smoothly, her hands steady and her heart full. Tom ran toward her, clapping and smiling. "You did it, Lila. You flew it perfectly." Lila climbed out of the cockpit, laughing and shaking with excitement. She looked at the plane, feeling a connection stronger than ever. This was not just a machine. It was a dream, a challenge, and a story she had written with her own hands. Neighbors who had come to watch cheered and clapped. They were amazed at what Lila had accomplished. A young mechanic with determination and hard work had taken a plane that had been hidden in a collapsing barn for decades and brought it back to life. As the sun set, Lila walked around the plane, touching its wings gently. She whispered, "Thank you for trusting me. Together we made this dream come true." She felt proud, happy, and inspired. This plane had changed her life, showing her that hard work, patience, and belief in herself could turn any dream into reality. That evening, Lila returned home, her mind full of plans for the future. She knew she would continue restoring the plane, learning more, and maybe even inspiring others to follow their dreams. The barn she had bought for $500 had given her more than a plane. It had given her a purpose, a passion, and the courage to believe in herself. Lila knew that this was only the beginning. Her adventure had taken flight, and she was ready for every new challenge, every new discovery, and every dream waiting to come true. The sky was no longer a limit. It was her playground, and she was ready to soar. The barn that had once been old, broken, and forgotten was now full of life. Lila had worked tirelessly for months, and the plane she had discovered was fully restored. But her journey was far from over. She wanted to share this amazing story with others and inspire people to follow their dreams, just as she had. Lila decided to turn the barn into a small museum. She cleaned the space carefully, organizing tools, old parts, and photographs she had collected during the restoration process. She hung pictures of the plane during its restoration and added information about its history. Visitors would be able to see how a forgotten plane had come back to life through hard work, dedication, and passion. She also added a small section to teach visitors about mechanics and restoration. Children and young adults would be able to learn about engines, tools, and how machines worked. Lila wanted the museum to be more than just a display. She wanted it to inspire curiosity and learning. Word spread quickly in the town. People were amazed that a young mechanic had not only restored a rare World War II plane, but also turned an old barn into a place of learning. Lila welcomed visitors every day, telling them the story of how she had bought a collapsing barn for $500 and found a hidden treasure inside. One sunny morning, a group of children arrived at the museum. They were curious and excited, asking questions about the plane and how it had flown again. Lila smiled as she showed them the cockpit and explained the engine. She let them touch small parts of the plane, showing them how each piece worked. The children's eyes sparkled with wonder, and Lila felt proud. She realized that her work was inspiring a new generation to dream big and work hard. Tom often visited to help and share his knowledge. Together, they worked on small projects in the museum, teaching visitors how to restore old machines and understand the history behind them. Lila was happy to share her skills, knowing that the museum was a place where learning and passion could grow. The plane, once hidden and forgotten, now sat proudly in the center of the barn. Its polished wings gleamed in the sunlight that came through the open roof. Visitors would often ask Lila to tell the story of the first flight. She would smile and describe the moment she guided the plane into the sky for the first time. The excitement, the fear, and the joy all returned as she told her story. Lila's life had changed completely. From a young mechanic who fixed small machines in her workshop, she had become a restorer of history, a teacher, and a source of inspiration. She realized that the barn, the plane, and the months of hard work had given her more than she could have imagined. She had discovered her true passion and the power of persistence. Every evening after the museum closed, Lila would walk around the plane. She would gently touch its wings, remembering the first day she saw it hidden under a tarp in a dusty barn. She whispered softly, "Thank you for trusting me. Together we have done something amazing." The plane had not only changed her life, but had also changed the lives of everyone who visited the museum. People from the town and even nearby cities came to see the restored plane, hear its story, and learn from Lila's experience. Many left inspired to follow their own dreams, no matter how small or challenging they seemed. As time passed, Lila continued to restore other machines and explore new projects. But the plane remained the heart of the museum. It reminded her every day that curiosity, determination, and hard work could turn even the simplest discovery into something extraordinary. Lila looked at the barn one evening, the golden sunset lighting up the wooden walls and the shining plane. She smiled, knowing that her life had changed forever. From a $500 barn to a restored WWII plane and a place of learning, her journey had been remarkable. She whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning. There is so much more to discover, restore, and share, and I am ready." The barn, once collapsing and forgotten, now stood as a symbol of dreams, courage, and the power of following your heart. Lila had found her purpose, and her adventure had become a story that would inspire people for generations. And in the quiet of the evening, the plane seemed to shine a little brighter, as if thanking her for giving it a second chance at life. Lila knew that together, they had created something truly unforgettable.